And here to discuss this and more is Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Secretary Buttigieg, thank you for joining us. And Secretary, look,
thanks for having me.
As Pete just laid out, what just happened in this near collision in Austin? A similar thing happened in JFK. Safety is supposed to be, the crown jewel of the U.S. air transportation system. What's being done to prevent these things from happening? And as you heard Pete say, there's now a recommendation that these cockpit voice recorders be left open basically for 25 hours. Is that going to happen in your view?
So it's certainly something that I'm asking FAA to look at, especially knowing that the technologies have evolved since that cockpit voice recorder first became something that was required and standardized on aircraft. Both we and the NTSB need good data to be able to understand what is happening in these situations and piece together sometimes split-second decisions and the different concerns that play out over those scenarios. We have an extraordinary record of safety in our skies. Most years, even in a country that will see more than 100 people die on our roadways every single day, something else we're very focused on dealing with. A typical number for passenger airline deaths in many recent years is 0. It takes a lot of work to keep it that way, and we need to make sure that we continue advancing as we see more and more demand, more and more complexity, more and more technology coming into the national airspace. It's one of the reasons why this year is going to be an especially important year for us to be working with Congress. FAA is coming up for reauthorization. It means there's going to be an opportunity to make sure we have the funding, the people, the organization, the budgeting that is needed to accelerate the kind of modernization that has been underway for a very long time and frankly needs to be accelerated, and to make sure that we're staying ahead of some of the things that could impact safety in the future.
And speaking of the FAA doesn't have a permanent administrator right now. President Biden's nominee, Philip Washington, hasn't even received a confirmation hearing on Capitol Hill. With all of this going on, are you confident that he will be confirmed for that post?
We are very eager to see Phil Washington confirmed. He's a terrific leader, not just in terms of his direct aviation experience running the Denver airport, but having the kind of experience that I think really fits the needs of the FAA at this moment, which is understanding how to work in large, complex public sector agencies and guide them forward. As you mentioned, the president first nominated him for this very important role in July of last year. He was renominated for the new year. We are hopeful of a Senate hearing and a favorable Senate vote very soon. The acting administrator and the team at FAA are working very hard and doing phenomenal work. There is no substitute in any part of the federal government for having a confirmed leader in place, and that's exactly what we need to get to with Phil Washington.
And just switching gears here a little bit to the suspected Chinese spy balloon. It was a recent bright spot for the FAA in coordination with other agencies on this. But I want to ask you about this other incident that was revealed where another balloon traversed U.S. airspace in the Biden administration. I'm wondering, was that detected in real time? And are you and in the administration confident that these vulnerabilities and how we monitor our airspace have now been rectified?
So the part that I can speak to is the relationship between the FAA and our national security teams, including the military and the Pentagon. And there was a great example of that in the coordination that went on to make sure that as this incursion and eventual shoot down took place, that there was no damage and no risk to aviation. Remember, this is not just an issue of being concerned about any risk to life and property on the ground, but also anything in between the very high altitude that this balloon was flying at, and all of the commercial aviation and general aviation activities that were going on between the ground and that high altitude, because of course anything that was falling would fall through that airspace. It's one of the reasons why there was the close coordination set up from early in the process, and then ultimately that led to the decision to close or set up ground stops at 3 of the airports nearest that location where the shootdown ultimately took place. Did lead to about, I believe, about 55 flights being delayed, but ultimately met our most important goal, which of course is safety. And while I can't speak to every element of everything that goes on the national security side, I can tell you that when it comes to protecting civil aviation, we're going to continue our pattern of excellent cooperation and coordination between the military side and the civilian side to protect Americans.
And in just a few hours, President Biden is going to be on Capitol Hill delivering his State of the Union address. You and other administration officials have said that this administration has delivered historic results, but the polling, as I'm sure you've seen, on the economy tells a different story. Just 6 in 10 American adults say that President Biden hasn't accomplished anything. What's behind that, do you think? Is it that the policy, is it just a communications issue, or could it be that the policies are not reaching people where they need it the most?
Well, look, we have the lowest unemployment since well before I was born right now. We have the numbers are in, and it's very clear that in terms of Americans every day being able to find work, we have the highest rate of job creation just in the first 2 years of this administration of any president ever. Now, it's true that there still are headwinds and issues affecting our economy. It's also true that there is, frankly, an enormous, well-resourced noise machine that doesn't always make it easy to tell our story through some of the online negativity and partisanship that's there. But that's part of why the State of the Union is such a great opportunity to lay out in very direct, factual terms what has been achieved and what is going to continue. Remember, some of the most important achievements of this president and this administration are quite new, and I'll point to things like $35 insulin, a $35 a month cap for any senior, anyone on Medicare, and of course the president continues to push for that to happen for every single American. That's something that's only been a reality for a matter of weeks. Same is true for some of these other economic wins. We recognize that's going to take a little while to flow through, but the point is we need to keep up this economic vision that's based on building the economy, as the president often says, from the bottom up and the middle out, instead of lurching back toward the policies that are more about things like tax cuts for the wealthy and corporations that many House Republicans appear to be pushing. The American people already agree with the president on each of these major steps, whether it's letting Medicare negotiate prescription drug prices, whether it's having fair taxation that asks the wealthiest to pay their fair share, which, by the way, is a big part of how we're cutting the deficit, something else that most Republicans and Democrats agree on, at least around the country, if not always on Capitol Hill. And, you know, the president's put forward a year ago a unity agenda that I think we're going to hear more about tonight. Things like fighting cancer, fighting the opioid epidemic, supporting Americans' mental health, and supporting our veterans. That means so much to so many Americans. And as an example on something that even in today's Washington, we should be able to come together and get done, to say nothing of the infrastructure bill that, of course, we're very, very proud of and very hard at work delivering.
All right, Secretary Buttigieg, thank you for joining us today on all of that.
Thank you. Good to be with you.